that you see on the first page here, this is actually a rendering of King Philip done by none other than Paul Revere.
Well, that's a long time later.
Years after, obviously, the conflict, a fellow named Benjamin Church, who's an ancestor of mine, he'd been keeping extensive memoir material of his participation in the war, which ultimately was published by his son. And in the second edition, somebody recruited Paul Revere to do this rendering of King Philip. It's become sort of the seminal image of King Philip, albeit done, decades after the fact. So that's what that is. Let me start. Just following up on what David said. This truly was the most lethal war ever waged on American soil. It was just a devastating conflict on both sides. This data, I didn't ever think that the Department of Defense would have kept track of this kind of information, but it did. And you'll see in this chart, the most interesting being the right-hand column, deaths per 100,000. By far, King Philip's War was the most devastating, lethal conflict. And you'll note it's not just American soil. World War II is down there as well. And while the sheer number of deaths, obviously in World War II, eclipses King Philip's War on a percentage basis, it pales by comparison. And of course, the Native American deaths, you can see is just, geometrically more than any other population in American history, even the Civil War. So that's kind of the beginning point on this. This was just such an American tragedy. How did it happen? So let me talk a little bit about that, starting with who was King Philip. Philip wasn't his name. His name was Metacom, or depending upon which historian you rely upon, Metacomet, and he was the son of Massachusetts. Many of you who know, have your Mayflower history down, know that he was the sachem, that's how it's pronounced, of the Wampanoag tribe. He was, a great friend of the Pilgrims. Some would say Plymouth would not have survived but for Massachusetts and the Wampanoags. Metacom was his son. Along the way, so in 1638, that's when he was born. When he was a younger man, he became Philip really on his own steam. He wasn't named Philip by anybody else. He decided to take a Christian name, not because he had converted to Christianity. I think that's a misconception. He took the name along with his brother Wamsutta, who also renamed himself Alexander. He then took over, Philip did, as sachem of the Wampanoags after both his father and his brother died. He didn't call himself king. The colonists, I truly think this was meant as a slap in the face. They called him King Philip because he was exerting himself in a powerful way. Some might say an obnoxious way, but in a powerful way. And so the English dubbed him King Philip. So that's how we get to King Philip. And it was shortly after he assumed the role of sachem of the tribe that his tribe began to agitate. And of course, in the decades before this, from the 1620s to 1660, a lot of adversity had started developing, often over land grabs, however you want to define it, invasion of hunting grounds and all of that. So under Philip's leadership, they began to resist. And Plymouth colony was threatened by this to the degree that it was going to Philip, really not demanding yet, but politely asking him to surrender his arms and subject himself to English law, which obviously was, a big ask Philip to do that, certainly in the face of all the controversies that were swirling. Who was on the other side of this growing tension? Well, one of them, speaking of our Mayflower ancestors, was Josiah Winslow, son of Edward. He had, by 1673, become the governor of Plymouth Colony, very powerful in that role and very much an antagonist of the Native American tribes. It wasn't just the Wampanoags, there were the Narragansetts and others. And he was not a friend of the Native American tribes. The most, I would say, unspeakable thing that he presided over was the trial in 1675 of 3 Wampanoags, which led to their being hung by the neck. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But it was really that event that precipitated the war. Before all of that, he was nominated and led the United Colonies. And then during the war, I'll talk about the Great Swamp Fight. He was literally on the horse with his sword at the Great Swamp Fight, which we'll talk about as probably the worst of the battles that raged during this war, which only lasted about a year, but it was hellacious, as we'll talk about. So who are the other Mayflower sons and grandsons? As David said, probably all of us, whoever our Mayflower passenger is, there is a son, a grandson, a great-grandson who fought in this war. And I've just done a very partial list here of some of them that I've picked out of the lists of soldiers here and there. There were lots of different towns, lots of different areas of New England that contributed soldiers, and Mayflower descendants were really strewn around the landscape. But you had Josiah Standish, you had the son of William Bradford, son of Howland, etc. You go down that list, you see Benjamin Church, who I mentioned at the outset, who wrote the memoir about his experiences during the war. He was the grandson of Richard Warren. I throw in John Gorham just because he's another ancestor of mine. Howland is one of my ancestors. And David, you'll chuckle at this. John Gorham's son, Shubael Gorham, ran a tavern, and it was through Shubael that I became a member of the Flagon and Trencher. And David is very vigorously trying to join as we speak. It's a society that only descendants of tavern owners can belong to. So my tavern owner, his father, John Gorham, was a captain in that battle, son-in-law of John Howland. You'll see that Caleb Cook, one of the, I think he's a grandson of Francis Cook, importantly, he was there at the very end when King Philip was killed, shot. There were 2 people who were there, just 2, who confronted him. The first shot was by Caleb Cook, and he missed. So he didn't get the glory, as it were, of killing King Philip. His Native American colleague who was there shot the fatal shot. So well before the war, and again, the date is 1675, 1676, well before the war, for decades, the effort was underway, driven in the first instance by the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The Puritans were much more aggressive in trying to Christianize, convert the Native Americans than the Plymouth Pilgrims were. But the effort was on for decades to successfully convert the Native Americans. And I say here in the slide, with little success. You see to the right, the front page of John Eliot's translation of the Bible into the Massachusetts language. This was an effort to further this really concerted effort to convert Native Americans by having a Bible in their language. It was the first Bible actually printed in the New World. And John Eliot was just committed to the mission, ultimately unsuccessful. But as part of that effort, lots of schools were formed. Interestingly, Harvard University started out as an Indian school. And a number of Native Americans went to Harvard, including John Sassamon, who we'll talk about later, very important figure in all of this. Oh, I should mention, there was a pejorative phrase used to describe some of the Native Americans who went to school. They were called prayer Indians, as in, you've gone over to the other side and we don't like you. So a large contingent of Native Americans did not like the Native Americans who actually did convert or were in the process of converting. And so again, pejoratively, the prayer Indians were on one side of this theological divide that really did separate the Wampanoags and other Native American tribes in New England. Roger Williams played an important role here. You may know him as the founder of what became Rhode Island. He was, to use a phrase, a bit of a rabble rouser in New England. He started out really protesting what the Massachusetts Bay Colony and Plymouth were up to in terms of the approach to the Native Americans, so much so that he was convicted of sedition in 1635. Remember, Massachusetts Bay got rolling in the 1630s and immediately confronted Williams. He ultimately escaped, left town as it were, went down south and founded the Providence Plantations, and really was, I think, the first man of religion, man of faith, to start talking about the separation of church and state and religious freedom in a very overt way and a very confrontational way with Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth. He did assist the local tribes in the Pequot War. Some of you may know that. The King Philip's War was not the first war that erupted in New England. Really the first one was the Pequot War, and I think it was almost like one day, but also a devastating conflict for the Pequots. They were just horrifically massacred and left somewhat just a collapsed tribe after the Pequot War was over. Williams and the Providence Plantations saw what was going on, broadly speaking, including the enslavement of Native Americans, which was going on, either enslaved to serve their masters in New England or enslaved and sold in the West Indies, where a lot of trade was taking place with New England. And so he caused the Providence Plantations to bring into form a anti-slavery law. It was never enforced, but not for lack of good intentions there. He was a friend, clearly, Roger Williams was, of the Native American tribes. Ironically, later became a captain in the militia during King Philip's War. I can't really reconcile that. I'm not sure historians can. The native tribes were not kind to him. They burned down Providence and they burned his house down as part of the effort to combat the forces that were coming down upon them down in what's now Rhode Island. I like this quote from Williams. It kind of put an exclamation mark on his point of view and how he really was adverse to the leadership in Massachusetts Bay and Plymouth. Boast not, proud English, of thy birth and blood. Thy brother Indian is by birth as good. Of one blood God made him, and thee and all as wise, as fair, as strong, as personal. Couldn't think of a stronger statement that the persecution of the Native Americans was problematic, I guess, to say the least. So Williams was out on the forefront of efforts to stop the carnage, stop the enslavement, change the course of the colonial attitude about Native Americans. Obviously, he failed. Some of the precursors to King Philip's War, there were many. I just highlight a few of them here with some of the timelines. I've mentioned the Pequot War, the Mystic Massacre I was referring to earlier. Hundreds and hundreds of Native Americans, Pequots, massacred in the Mystic Massacre. The United Colonies was formed in the face of the threats from the Native Americans, and this was basically the colonies banding together. You had Massachusetts Bay, you had Connecticut, you had Plymouth. They came together in 1643 to get ready for multiple conflicts that they were anticipating. The first thing they confronted was or attempted to do was to co-opt the leaders of the major tribes. And in this example you see here in 1662, literally at gunpoint, they took King Philip's brother, Alexander, in chains to Plymouth to answer for his threatened attacks on Plymouth. He was castigated, but he was released. Yet he died a few days later. Everybody amongst the tribes suspected that he had been poisoned. But that was the end of Alexander, and that's when Philip assumed the role of sachem for the Wampanoags. It led to immediately a peace between Philip and the then governor Prince, among others, to cease land sales, which had been such a source of controversy. The Indians arguing that they were being raped and pillaged through these fictitious land grants and other mischief that was taking place. Years later, and this was just a few years before the war, Philip, like his brother, was dragged to Plymouth, and not at gunpoint, but under threat of being overwhelmed by the colonial armies, forced to enter into a one-sided agreement, really disarm, and agree to abide by English law. It was a laydown. It was effectively a surrender by King Philip, and he swallowed hard and did it, but the resentment, the seething rage about doing that stayed with him and ultimately fueled what happened in 1675. More tensions that you see just summarized here, my reference to the Prayer Indians. Increasingly, this religious divide is fueling the call to arms, the westward expansion. And you see it in the literature. You see pamphlets being published constantly in New England and in London, but in New England, really now vilifying Native Americans. Think of where we started with Plymouth, Massachusetts, the friend of the Pilgrims. Think of that sense of partnership. And now think of the English just a few decades later, describing Native Americans as heathens, savages. It was a constant refrain in the literature and infected everybody among the colonists in terms of their attitudes towards the Native Americans. And all of these efforts to try to control Philip, it just really worsened the climate. It worsened his attitude as the leading sachem about whether continue to appease the colonists. I mentioned John Sassamon. His last name doesn't sound Native American, but he was a Native American. He was fluent in English. He was extremely close to King Philip. He was an advisor. He was an interpreter. He was a go-between between Philip and Plymouth. He was, I would say, inclined towards pacification, if that's the right word. He was inclined towards religious conversion. He did convert to Christianity under the leadership of John Eliot, who published that Bible I talked about earlier, and he went to Harvard. So you would say, a very prominent player in the relations between the Wampanoags, the Native Americans, Plymouth, and Massachusetts Bay. Why do I highlight him? It was his death that precipitated the war. In January of 1675, he goes to Plymouth. He has a relationship with Governor Winslow. And he basically says, watch out, Philip is arming and he's planning to attack, which was true. He makes it abundantly clear to Winslow that they ought to organize themselves. Winslow ignores him. By all accounts, he took no serious heed of what Sassamon said. The next thing that happens, well, he disappears, first of all, but then he's found dead shortly after this meeting with Winslow. He's found dead in a swamp. Actually, it was winter. The body of water had frozen over. They found him under the ice, and they presumed that he had drowned on his own initiative, not killed. However, 6 months later, the colonists, led by Winslow, decide that they're going to charge 3 Native Americans almost at random of murdering Sassamon. They drag them to Plymouth. There's a kangaroo court trial of the 3 Native Americans. All 3 of them are hung by the neck. Somewhat miraculously, the rope on one of them breaks. And so one of the 3 survives, and he is not rehung, as it were. He's killed later, but in all events, the trial, the conviction, the hanging of these 3 Native Americans was the real, final straw for Philip. And almost immediately, the war begins. They launch attacks all over the immediate area, small settlements, small towns. There weren't any big towns. They were all small towns, unequipped to do battle, no forts, no militia, no trained soldiers, just men, women, and children at the mercy of the Wampanoags and the other Native Americans who swarmed over their towns. So here is a kind of a crude map that was done at the time of New England. At the time that the war broke out, it's actually sideways. If you were to invert the map, you'd see Cape Cod there down at the bottom. You'd see the Connecticut River up there at the top. You see Hartford called out on the river. You see Springfield called out on the river. You see the reference to the various tribes, the Narragansetts, the Pequots, etc. This was kind of the landscape at the time the war began. Lots of tribal villages interspersed with lots of small settlements of colonists. The tribes themselves, besides having declared war essentially on the colonists, they were at war with each other. And so, as you see in the slide, the Narragansetts were at war with the Wampanoags, the Mohegans were at war with the Pequots. Basically, all hell was breaking loose in New England in all directions. There was no safe place. As I said, the English settlements were very much unprotected, very remotely located too. I just took this little summary here from a book that was written contemporaneously by Nathaniel Saltonstall. It's on your reading list. It's a very short read. You can find it and download it for free on the internet. Go to archives.org. It's on there. He wrote several treatments of King Philip's War during the time period he was in the war. And you can see how he describes some of the mayhem in the various towns that he's listed here. Not one house left standing, but one house left standing, none left, wholly laid in ashes, wholly ruined. And this last quote is just so chilling. Many had been destroyed with exquisite torments and most inhumane barbarities. Now, bear in mind, and there's a great book, by the way, by Jill Lepore named The Name of War. One thing she highlights is that the history of this war was written by the colonists. There are no Native American treatments of the war. So we often get these kind of one-sided commentaries about the war, both from contemporaneous writers like Saltonstall and others. But at least this reflects, I would say, fairly the colonists' view of what was happening. Their settlements were being destroyed. They were being pillaged, essentially, by King Philip and his armies. I mentioned Benjamin Rush. Who was he? He actually was, a Mayflower descendant. You see here the face page of the history that was written by his son Thomas, based upon Benjamin's own records. He was a shoemaker of no particular importance or prominence, who somehow, through sheer force of will, I think, became one of the leaders of the colonial armies that fought King Philip. He was on the front lines of the Great Swamp Fight, which I'll get to in a second. Really changed the course of several important battles, including the Great Swamp. Very important guy, I guess I would say. And of all the people who were major actors in the conflict, he's certainly not only in the top 10, I put him in the top 5 of importance in his role as a leader of the colonist forces. You can see all the battles that are flagged in this depiction here that was done by someone after the fact. Lots of different conflicts, and you can see Philip's death kind of in small print there above the word Rhode Island. That's where he ultimately was chased down and killed. But Philip and his army traveled all over this area, over to the Connecticut River, up north to almost the northern border of Massachusetts. Really, in a short period of time, Philip, being chased by the colonists, covered a lot of territory and pillaging villages along the way. I mentioned the Great Swamp Fights. This is a rendering of the fight. It's a little bit odd. Nathaniel Philbrick has this in his book, and he kind of is amused by the conical hats shown on the soldiers there. I'm not sure that that's how they looked in real life, but this was a rendering of it with, you'll see what looks like a fort up on the opposing hill, commanded by Native American warriors. This was what was dubbed the Great Swamp Fight. It was near Mount Hope, Rhode Island. It was a massacre. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Native Americans were slaughtered. They burned the fort, including burning the wigwams of women and children. Many were beheaded. And this goes down in history, I think, as one of the worst massacres of Native Americans that frankly ever occurred. I'm sad to say that Benjamin Church, my ancestor, was leading that fight, but a lot of blame goes around for the brutality of this particular conflict, which really, I think, started the reversal of fortunes for King Philip. He had been quite successful in the war to this point. In December 1675, everything changed course after this war, and for the next 6 months, the battles raged, but there was already an indication that Philip just could not sustain this war against the combined forces of the United Colonies. Quickly, because I'm going to start to run out of time here. Some of you may have heard of Mary Rowlandson. She was a figure in this, her story became very popular, kind of a bestseller of the time. She was in the middle of the war. She was in one of the villages that was attacked by Philip's armies, and she was captured after being shot, her family members killed. She was captured. She ended up being somewhat befriended by Philip. He carried her along as they retreated and went through the wilds of New England. Mary was with him. Ultimately, she was released a few months after her capture. And after being released, she wrote a book, again, a bestseller, The Sovereignty and Goodness of God, in which she recounts her experience as essentially a slave for 2 months serving King Philip. You see the cover there, again, available to download. Very interesting read, and it gives you a sense of the colonists' view of this war, which, as you can imagine, was viewing Philip and his armies as savages, murderers, etc. The enemies are closing in. By July, I'll skip over the February and April. By July, my guy, Benjamin Church, I shouldn't say Rush, I should say Church, convinces Plymouth to start converting some of the tribes and bringing them over to the colonist side. He was successful in that. And now Philip was facing not just the combined forces of the colonists, but also Native American helpers. And so this, again, kind of cemented the outcome. Philip just did not have the resources to continue to fight, including a lack of food. As they traveled the forests of New England, they were starving. Resources were just disappearing. And that's when Caleb Cook and his Native American partner finally, on August the 12th of 1676, cornered Philip at Mount Hope, Rhode Island, and shot him dead. And this is Caleb Cook's, remember Francis Cook's grandson. This is his quote. He was shot and killed on his face in the mud and water with his gun under him. And there's an etching that was done depicting that. Somewhat horrifically, after he was killed, they chopped up his body, drawn and quartered, as they call it. The Native American who shot him took Philip's hand as a souvenir. And for years, he took Philip's hand around in a jar. I don't know what it was, formaldehyde or something, took his hand around in a jar to various taverns, showing off Philip's hand. Really quite gruesome stuff. After his death, his severed head, was taken to Plymouth. It was put on display, and it was there for 2 years to allow everybody to, I guess, relish the victory over King Philip and his war. His wife and son were sold into slavery. Just a horrible end to what was otherwise an amazing person, at least in his early years. The colonial leaders also started authorizing the indiscriminate killing of Native Americans, hundreds over a period of years. And the promise of peaceful coexistence that started with Mayflower and Plymouth really just couldn't be sustained, wasn't sustained. I was interested in this, and I'll skip over it again in the interest of time, happy to talk to people afterwards. But by the 1800s, Philip had become mythological. He was, plays were written about him, songs were written about him. He was kind of deified in some respect, not by the Native Americans, but by the Americans living in New England. And as you see here, during the Revolutionary War, the colonists fighting the British kind of likened what the British were doing to them to what the British did to King Philip, which is kind of an odd twist on it. But indeed, there were lots of tracts written in which the colonists fighting the Revolutionary War embraced King Philip as a role model of sorts. Here is two images I thought were, I don't know, bittersweet. The left one is of the monument to King Philip that is down in Rhode Island in Mount Hope at the site of the battle where he was killed. And on the right, this, I just think this awful image of how King Philip was trivialized into the name of a bed and breakfast inn and the road named after him in Metacom Avenue. Lots and lots of that all over New England still persists. So an inglorious outcome for King Philip by anybody's reckoning. That's the end of my talk.